Uh, Today's lecture, I would be giving a short of a overview of the functional organization of the spinal cord. It comprises mainly, mostly in terms of the functional anatomical basis of the spinal cord. I have outlined this lecture with the following points. One, I describe about the anatomy of the vertebral column and spinal cord. Very briefly, I will not go into the details as your anatomy teachers do. And I will mention about the spinal cord, its placement in the vertebral canal and its coverings briefly, because we come across these terminologies very often. Then I will tell about the distribution of the white and gray matter in the spinal cord, how it is distributed and at different levels. Then dermatome distribution of the spinal segments or the skin, how it is being distributed in the various segments of the spinal cord. Then about the spinal nuclei and the spinal laminae. Then I talk briefly on the ascending tracts. I talk briefly on the descending tracts, and I will talk about the functions of the spinal cord. Here I give quite a good information about the functions. Then I summarize and I provide you the assignment and references. This is my plan of lecture. Now we start with the anatomy. Here is the vertebral column. This is a vertebral column there. Okay, in this vertebral column, you have inside the column, you have this spinal cord, and the roots emerge through these openings here, or in the column in between. So now we have a precisely the spinal cord is divided into 5 different segments. The one which is in the neck, the cervical segment, the thoracic cord or thoracic segment, and the lumbar segment, the sacral, and coccygeal, especially in human, and coccygeal cord. So these are the things, and each one, the cervical will have 8 roots coming out, 8 pair of roots coming up, the thoracic 12 pairs, and the lumbar 5, sacral 5, and then you have this coccygeal 1. So that is the distribution, and the spinal cord is a highway for the communication between the body and the brain. Body means the entire the peripheral segment entering into the central nervous system. And it is contained, or it is present in the canal of this bony structure, what is called a vertebral column. As I have described, it is divided into 5 sections: cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacral, and coccygeal regions. The segments supplying the limbs are enlarged. So that means these are the segments where these nerves supply the lower limb, and these nerves supply the upper limb. They become large because of the amount of the motor or sensory inputs from these extremities is increasing. That is why it is more. If you come back to the thorax, it is less. So like that, the segment supplying the limbs is enlarged. That is why we have the cervical enlargement and we have a lumbar enlargement. So then this is the caudal end, and this is a cranial end of the spinal cord. So this is the large portion is the final terminalis, and this forms the cauda equina. Maybe we will see the cauda equina here, so you can just see that cauda equina very clearly. The same segment same segment, what I was trying to talk about, how this spinal cord is located within this canal or bony structure. So that is the protection it is having. In this bony structure, this is covered by membranes. That is the dura here, the arachnoid matter here, and pia matter is within, which is associated with this spinal cord, and dura mater is associated with the space. This is a epidural space. This is a subarachnoid space. So this space is a subarachnoid space. When they do the lumbar puncture, they enter into this subarachnoid space, and this is being filled with the fluid that is a cerebrospinal fluid. And we have in the center is the canal, the central canal. So now, so we have these structures. You can just see that the entire spinal cord on either side, they are held by the ligament, what is called a denticulate ligament. This is a denticulate ligament. You can just see there. So that is trying to hold the cord in one place. It's very friable and very it can be easily distorted. For that reason, it has to be held nicely in the bony canal. And these are the spinal nerves. This is the dorsal root ganglia there, and the other one, this is the ventral root. And this is the spinal cord transverse section. So now, I have already mentioned about these structures, because these are the vertebrae. So you have these things, the bony process is coming out here, and so this is the posterior side, and this is the anterior side. So this is the anterior or ventral, this is posterior or dorsal. This is about how the spinal cord is secured within this canal. Now coming back here, just you can see the spinal cord and its roots. They are coming here, they are coming here. This one is the posterior root. This is a posterior root. If you are going here, this is the posterior. This is the posterior here. This is the dorsal root ganglion. This is coming up here. That forms the posterior root. This is a posterior root, and this is the anterior root. This posterior root is also known as a dorsal root. The anterior root is also known as a ventral root. So now this is the posterior. The dark blue is the posterior root here, making the dorsal root ganglion. And the lighter ones are the lighter blue are the ventral roots. They are the motor things. Now this spinal cord now making this H-shaped gray matter with a central canal, and this is being surrounded by a membrane, that is a pia mater. This is covered by the membrane pia mater. Now this pia mater, then we have a space here in between this pia mater and arachnoid matter. This is and here it is covered by the arachnoid membrane, where blood vessels are present. So then these two layers are covered by external tough layer, that is a dura mater, which is attached with the bony structure. So if I just go back here, this is where the dura mater is attached. So this is dura mater here, and this is a cushion of fat for the epidural space, and this dura mater is present in this cushion, and it is attached to the almost near to the bony prominence. You can just see that it is with the bony prominence. So now this is about how the roots are coming, what are the layers. So at least you try to remember those the pad, the pia, arachnoid, and dura are the layers in the spinal cord, and this is the central canal, and this space is filled with the cerebrospinal fluid, and you see this denticulate ligament. This denticulate ligament I was trying to show here. This is a denticulate ligament. Okay, so now just move on. This is again a little bit enlarged view of this thing, telling the spia matter, the arachnoid matter, and the dura matter, the dorsal root, the ventral root, dorsal root ganglion, and the various structures. So how they are secured in these all things are there in the bony canal. Then these are the, so I was telling about this subarachnoid space. You have these arteries, arterial supply. So you have these the posterior spinal arteries, and this is a anterior spinal artery. So they are there, and these anterior spinal artery and posterior spinal arteries are there in the subarachnoid layer, and that will supply or that will provide these things. But however, the arachnoid have the blood-brain barrier, because it will not allow everything to enter into this into this pia and subsequent these things. But it keeps the nutrition for the remaining part of remaining segments of this part, and even it provides the energy and the perfusion of the various ions. Now, coming back, if this is the transverse section of the spinal cord, it's at one level, and here we have a number of structures. In this transverse section of the cord, the blue one is the dorsal root or posterior root. The red one is the ventral root or anterior root. And as per Bell-Mezendy law, the dorsal root carries the sensory information, and the ventral root carries the motor information. So that is what the Bell-Mezendy law states. In some textbooks, it is confused with the synaptic transmission. It is nothing to do with the synaptic transmission. The work of Bell and Mezendy, they were published separately, and then later on they realized that they are one is from different countries, and they try to establish this thing, and finally they joined these two things. The anterior spinal nerve roots contain only motor fibers. This is anterior, the red one, and the posterior roots contain the sensory fibers. And he mentioned that the signals reaching here in the posterior root, they are that means the nerve impulses are conducted only in one direction. So that means the impulse is coming from this periphery to the center here, and from the center to the periphery. This is the direction. But this is being decided by the whatever synapse, that is the second part of, because many of the books try to extrapolate this component and trying to tell that in the synapse the afferent nerves and efferent nerves and a single synaptic transmission. It is Bell-Mezendy did not mention that, their work did not contain it. The second part, here the anterior horn, this is the anterior horn there, and this is the lateral horn. This is the anterior horn. Sorry about that. This is the anterior horn. This is the posterior horn, and this is the lateral horn. So these are number one. So the gray matter, this gray matter, you have the gray matter here, and these are containing the neurons. So in the neurons, we have one is the anterior horn. This is one. Number two is the posterior horn. Two is the posterior horn there, and it's a commissure, the joining between the other side of the other half of the spinal cord. And 4, 5, 6, this is the anterior funiculus. The 4 is the anterior funiculus, anterior horn or anterior space or anterior funiculus, the lateral funiculus, and 6 is the posterior funiculus. So now we have the anterior commissure, that is 7. 7 is the anterior commissure. 8 is the median one, and 9 is the posterior median. This 9 1. Then we have a central canal there, 10, and then 11 is the anterior root and a posterior root and a dorsal root ganglia. These are the structures of the spinal cord here, and I have taken it from Wiki. So now moving on. So the observations of Bell and Mezendy were summarized by Mueller's. So because the Mueller examined the Bell and Bell-Mezendi's law that posterior root carry the sensory information and the anterior root carries the motor information. So what he did the experiments on the frog, and by cutting the posterior root in the frog, they lost. What he found, there was a loss of sensation in the limb, but there was no paralysis of the limb. Limb was not paralyzed when he cut the posterior root. But when he cut the anterior root, the limb was paralyzed, but the sensation persisted. So this is what these are Mueller's observations. The Mueller's observation states that cutting posterior. This may happen here in human beings. Just like you just see that the poliomyelitis. What this poliomyelitis does? The poliomyelitis destroys the anterior horn cells, especially the motor neurons. So that means there is a paralysis. Sensations may remain because the posterior root is normal. Then, in case of tapes dorsalis or in case of the what is called a subacute combined degeneration, that is the disease affecting the large diameter fibers, which may happen because of the B12 deficiency, vitamin B12 deficiency. These posterior roots are affected, and especially the syphilis and the subacute combined degeneration, in which there will be a sensory loss which is controlling. So now I have given two examples here. It is the subacute combined degeneration resulting from the loss of the resulting from the vitamin B12 deficiency, or tapes dorsalis, because nowadays tapes dorsalis is not seen. So now, in case of the anterior, I mentioned about the poliomyelitis. So that is the about the Mueller's observations. Now coming back here, just the gray matter, you just see that this H-shaped gray matter, the H-shaped gray matter, you have this is posterior segment, and the funiculus, posterior funiculus, and the lateral funiculus, and the ventral funiculus. And you have this posterior horn, and this is a anterior horn. So this is how it is divided: a dorsal horn, ventral horn, and intermediate column. This is the intermediate column. This the green one is the intermediate column. So how this shape of these various structures change in different segments of the spinal cord. You start with the sacral, because the number of inputs, the number of muscles, this is small. You see the volume wise or size wise, it is smaller if you are thinking about the diameter of these things. And as it ascends up in the lumbar, it is becoming larger because a large amount of information coming from the lumbar cord, keeping the same dorsal and ventral relations. And these even because of the supply to the motor nerves and the sensory inputs, so the gray matter is more. You see the large amount of gray matter. Here, the gray matter is more there. And as it comes in the thorax, the gray matter becoming less and the white matter is increasing, and even gray matter is again. But when you come back to the cervical, where there is a cervical enlargement, this gray matter is more. So this is what is happening in the different levels of the spinal cord. Now, the area or the innervation of a skin by a single dorsal root ganglion, or a nerve from a single dorsal root ganglion, is known as a dermatome. And this is a beautiful picture. I love this picture because it provides us all the dermatome pattern of our body. You can just see that. This would be dealt wonderfully in your anatomy classes. You just see that here, this lady sitting there, and this blue component is cervical. The red component is thoracic. This purple light purple is a lumbar, and this is the bluish dark purple is the sacral segment. Same thing here. You can just see how the dermatomes are distributed. So that means this one starts here, the C2 here coming on the head here, then C3 here in the neck, C4 again in the neck here, anterior part, and C5 coming to the biceps area, that is in the hand. Then C6 is the radial side, and 7 is the hand, the radial side. 8 is the C8 is the ulnar side. T1 is the ulnar part of the forearm, and T2 is the um, uh, this is axillary and the upper brachium, and remaining thoracic segments T1 to T12 are distributed here in this pattern. Now we have the lumbar one hip region, then again the hip, lower hip, and the thigh. L2, L3 is the knee region, L4 is the calf or the lower leg, and L5 is the foot, and S1 is the heel, and S2 is the back of this, and S3 is the buttock. So this is how whole thing is distributed. This is the dermatome pattern. Maybe this idea, I think, if you try to look into this picture and try to visualize, whenever we are trying to map these things, sensory and motor examination and all those things, they can be visualized very easily. Suppose if you have this thing in your uh, mind, you can be able to answer very easily. And this one gives you a very broad view. That means the cervical is this much, and the thorax is this much, and the lumbar is this much, and sacral is this much. So you may not be able to make mistakes, and then you may be able to make it a finer adjustment with this figure. And I have taken this figure from the University Texas online resource material. Now, this is spinal cord nuclei, because we saw the, if you are looking at here, these are the horns. These horns are gray matters. These are gray matter. The gray matter contains neurons of the cell bodies, and these neurons are arranged in clusters. So now, on one side, we have the various nuclei of the spinal cord. So now these nuclei, starting with the cap-like structure, this is a marginal nucleus, where sensory information coming is some part are relayed into this thing, and they will be communicating with the intersegmental neurons. Then substantia gelatinosa cells, especially the thermal and nociceptive inputs, they relay here. Then nucleus propriosus, as it indicates, it's the proprioceptive inputs, they are relayed here. Now, all the proprioceptive, that means the position sense, they are either going to the segmental reflexes or going to the cerebellum. They are relayed here in the propriosus, nucleus propriosus. Then this is dorsal nucleus of the Clark. This is the dorsal nucleus of the Clark. So this would be making from here the impulses from the various parts of the muscle and body. They are coming here. They ascend. They will then relayed in. They are going as a dorsal spinocerebellar tract. So that means it will communicate with the cerebellum. So then intermediolateral nucleus. This is the nucleus for the sympathetic, especially this is dominant or predominant in the thoracolumbar segments. A lateral motor nucleus is the alpha motor neuron, and the medial motor neurons are the gamma motor neurons. This is the various nuclei of the spinal cord. So some group of workers, they try to see, because they try to see the arrangement of various neurons in a rexed or a laminar pattern. rexed or laminar pattern. They divided the entire spinal cord into 10 laminae. So you can just see that number 1 to number 10. So this is lamina 1, that is somewhere here. Then lamina 2, that corresponds to the substantial gelatinous cells. Then we have a 3 and 4. You have a 5 here. So all these, whatever the inputs coming, this the purple one or the violet one, the inputs coming from the body, all the sensory inputs are relayed here. And the intermediate one, or they have the interneurons, and they will try to ascend up. They will be number 8 and number 10. And these one will be making a synaptic contact or a synaptic neurons of the motor this thing. So that is how this color coding is talking about. And why I am telling all these information, when I try to discuss further, whenever we take certain sensory modalities, the information, whatever the nerve coming from a touch is relayed into, I will say that it is relayed in lamina 2 and lamina 4. So that means it relayed here one set of neuron, and there is another set of neuron here, 4 or 5, and these two are intercommunicated. So there is a network of these neurons here in this laminae. So that is the importance. I'm not going into the detail because each one has a distinct features, distinct characters, distinct set of neurons that will be. I think it may not be. It will be beyond your scope. Now we move on to the ascending tracts. Now, if because I said the spinal cord is the highway for the transmission of impulses from the body to the brain, or brain to the body. So that means there is a separator, and this separator, once in one set there is a up one side direction, that is the ascending tracts. These are the ascending tracts. We have 3 columns. I'm just telling. Spinal cord has a 3 column. This is a dorsal column, a lateral column, and the ventral column. And these set of neurons, they have these bundles. These are fasciculus. Fasciculus is a bundle. These are the white matter. These fibers are a group of fibers. They are ascending up as a bundle, and this is the posterior horn. You just see that this is the dorsal column, this is the posterior column. This is also known as the posterior column. And in the posterior column, we have one medial portion, one the little lateral. This is medial. This is if you are taking, this is the medial portion, and this is the lateral portion, that is near the gray matter, this H type of gray matter there. So now these are known as primarily the fasciculus gracilis, or gracilis bundle. Exactly the tract of gracilis tract, and cuneatus tract. So cuneatus is the tract which takes the information from the upper thorax and the neck. Cuneatus, neck and head. This information is coming here. Gracilis is the lower thoraco-lumbar and the sacral, lower below the thorax. These are the information, all the touch and fine touch sensation, vibration, and tactile localization. All those things are coming for these things, but it is only a shorting or a differentiating. This is upper thoracic and the neck region. This is the lower thoracic and the leg region. So like that, fasciculus, you can just see that this is cuneatus, this is gracilis. Because gracilis in the lower limb, it starts as 1 because there is no cuneatus in the sacral segments. In the sacral segments, you have the gracilis. As the fibers ascend up, the new fibers come, they will push this thing the medially. So that is why we have the space here. Then comes we have the cerebellar, spinocerebellar tract. This tract goes to the cerebellum. This is a dorsal side, that is in the posterior side. This is the posterior spinocerebellar tract. If there is a posterior spinocerebellar tract, there is a what is called a ventral or anterior spinocerebellar tract. So you just see that this is ascending. This is ascending to the medulla. The fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus cuneatus, they reach the medulla because the nucleus gracilis and the nucleus cuneatus is located in the medulla. And this is a spinocerebellar, that is, it is going to the cerebellum, the dorsal, from the dorsal side, and it is going to the cerebellum, relatively ventral side. Then we have a spinothalamic tract. So this is a lateral spinothalamic tract. So that means that it carries the sensation of pain, thermal sensation, crude touch, and all those things. And we have, if there is a lateral spinothalamic tract, then we have a anterior. If there is a lateral, there is the anterior spinothalamic tract. This is the anterior spinothalamic tract. Okay, so now we have some tracts which carry the information from the spinal cord to the midbrain or upper pontine areas, spinotactal and spino-olivary tract, because the spino-olivary and spinotactal tract. So these are basically all the ascending tracts. One, the fasciculus gracilis, fasciculus cuneatus, dorsal spinocerebellar, the ventral spinocerebellar, spinothalamic tract, and lateral spinothalamic tract, the ventral spinothalamic tract. So then we have the spinotactal and spino-olivary. So now we have other tracts, maybe as I discuss in the subsequent classes, wherein I may add up new things. When I add up new things, I will mention about that. This is about the ascending tracts. So same thing I am just showing you in a more amplified way, because you are sitting with a mobile phone, and maybe I try to expand it. Again, I repeat, fasciculus gracilis, fasciculus cuneatus. Gracilis is medial. Dorsal spinocerebellar, the ventral spinocerebellar. Spinothalamic. Then this is these are spinotactal or spinocollicular and spino-olivary. Or there are also some of those things which are not mentioned here. Spinoreticular fibers. That means some of them, they go up to the reticulum, reticular system in the midbrain and medulla. So then this is anterior spinothalamic, and this is lateral spinothalamic. Okay, so now there are intersegmental pathways that we have not shown here. Okay, these are the ascending tracts. Now, what are the descending tracts? So that is coming, that is going in this direction. These are the blue ones are the return direction. So the return direction is the descending tracts is the Leisser's tract that is sitting on the cap, marginal nucleus. This marginal nucleus, you can just see that. So the Leisser's tract, that this only descends for few segments. It's not for all the entire segments. Then we have lateral corticospinal tract. Lateral corticospinal tract. Whatever the from the cerebral cortex, we get information to the spinal motor neurons. So this comes here in the lateral corticospinal tract, and this lateral corticospinal tract, because it starts on the other side of the brain and comes in the medulla and crosses here and reaches. Maybe I will tell about these things in detail, but this bundle is the lateral corticospinal tract, and these axons then they enter here in the lateral nucleus or lateral part of this ventral horn cells, ventral horn neurons. So that means if if I'm going up here, maybe yes, I just say that the lateral corticospinal tract, they sends information to these motor neurons here, and from this motor neuron, the alpha motor neurons reach, and that will emerge to the muscles. So like that. So now this is a lateral corticospinal tract. So now then you have a small one. This is called a rubrospinal tract. Rubro is a red nucleus to the spinal cord. So rubrospinal is the midbrain. Red nucleus is a midbrain structure, and that also sends information for the motor activity. This is a rubrospinal tract. You can just see that it is associated with the lateral corticospinal tract. Now, if there is a lateral corticospinal tract, then there should be a ventral corticospinal tract. So ventral or anterior corticospinal tract, you just see that. This is a anterior corticospinal tract. Here in this side, if you are looking at, this is the anterior corticospinal tract. So then we have other these things, reticulospinal tract. So this is a reticulospinal tract, and this reticulospinal tract is coming from the medullary areas. The reticulospinal tract is divided into two components, one coming from the medulla and other coming from the pontine and the midbrain, ponto-mesenchymal reticular system. So now this is a medullary reticular area. This is the medullary reticulospinal tract. So now if you are looking at this part, is the ponto-reticulospinal tract. Okay. So then the vestibular system, the semicircular canals and the otolith organs, they send information. This is a vestibulospinal tract. This is a vestibulospinal tract. You can just see on this side. Then we have the colliculus, because we saw that the spinocollicular or spinotectal fibers there. Now from the tectum or from the tectum, or there is a midbrain structure, so that descends to the spinal cord. This is a tectospinal tract. I mentioned about a pontine reticulospinal tract. This is a pontine reticulospinal tract. Then comes, I have mentioned about the anterior corticospinal tract in reference to a lateral corticospinal tract. So now we have the medial longitudinal fasciculus. They will carry some information about the proprioception and other sensory modalities. Okay, so these are the various ascending descending tracts, because these are descending from the brain structures, the medulla, midbrain, and the cortex. So if I were to revise these things, maybe I have put this thing taken from Genong. On one side we have the descending tracts here, maybe some amount of modification. You just see that it is not exactly same in all the textbooks, but broadly there is an outline. This is a lateral corticospinal tract, this component, and somewhere here is the rubrospinal tract. So you just see that from red nucleus, it is coming from the cortex to medulla and downwards. Then olivospinal tract, that olivary nucleus, so that was not there. Then tectospinal tract, that was there. This is a tectospinal tract that is descending. So now this is a ventral corticospinal tract. You just see that this is the lateral corticospinal tract. This is ventral corticospinal tract. So then these are uncrossed fibers. After reaching here, they will then we have the vestibulospinal tract. So this is about all the descending fibers. This side we have the ascending tracts. So ascending tracts, I start with the fasciculus gracilis, from the lower limbs, the fasciculus cuneatus, cuneatus bundle or cuneatus tract, then dorsal spinocerebellar, the ventral spinocerebellar, then lateral spinothalamic, then we have a ventral spinothalamic tract here, and we have a spinotectal tracts. So maybe there are some other inputs of which we would consider in the whatever the discussions to whenever we get. These are broadly. I want you to practice these diagrams. Practice these diagrams in your as a home assignment, because this is one thing would be asked, or you should be familiar with this. Then coming back, what are the functions of the spinal cord? Here we touch basically the physiological component of the lecture. So now the spinal cord uh, is it has a sensory component, or it performs the sensory functions, it performs the motor functions, it is a center for reflexes, and it controls the autonomic activity. These are the four things it performs. So now already we in Bell Magentilla, what we have said, the posterior root is sensory, the ventral root is motor. Now coming back, what are those sensory functions? So these sensory functions include transfer of signals from body to brain, from the various part of the body. So from the skin, the fascia, the bone, all structures, muscle, ligaments, and the information from the or the signals are carried from the dorsal root nerve, and then enter into the dorsal root in a different layers or nuclei of the spinal cord, and then sent to the respective areas. That is one transfer of signals from body to brain. That is now. So it will have, because once while transferring, it will talk to the neighbors. That means the one segment up and one segment down. That means there are intersegmental and segmental communications, because it talks to others. It talks to these neurons which are coming up, have a synaptic contacts with the neighbors, and the one who are situated above the segment or below the segment. So that is another thing. This is important for coordinating the action, because I have to move certain actions. This does not only, because if I were to contract, it is involving groups, different segments. That particular muscle has been this thing, because it's not purely one segment. So that means a transfer of information from one segment to other segment or within the segment. Then signals are shorted. So that means the touch, fine touch, the vibration, they are shorted. They are going into the posterior column sensation. So they are known as the from the fasciculus gracilis or fasciculus cuneatus. The pain and the thermal sensations or lateral spinothalamic tract, or a crude touch is crude pressure is in the anterior spinothalamic tract. Like that, there is a shorting of the information, and this particular shorting is taking place in the laminae, whatever I have listed. So that means in the sensory function, it is shorting the signals and shorting the information, and it will send this part here, this part there. It's like a post office. If it is going to Bangalore, this thing is added up, or if it is going to some other place, or Tirupati, things are put. So like that, there is a shorting of the signals here. The signals which are fine touch on one side, pain and thermal sensations on the other side, proprioceptive on one side, like that. So then after the sorting, they process the signals. What is this processing means? The processing is first, there will be a convergence, because all these inputs are coming and converge on one target neuron. And this our target neuron or projecting neuron will that they are all coming there, relaying there's a convergence. And this from the target neuron, that either goes to the thalamus or to the some part in the reticular system, so that there is a convergence of these things. That is one type of processing. Then when converging. These have a collaterals. They will inhibit the lateral neurons, so that the information passing through the central projecting neuron is powerful or clear without any confusion. So that means there is a lateral inhibition. The side ones are inhibited. So that is focusing the information. Then sometimes, depending upon, because I talked about the synaptic facilitation and the synaptic inhibition, and this is the sort of the function there. So that means either they are inhibited or facilitated, so that this is a part of the signal, whether they have to be either giving a greater facilitation, so that the information is taken in priority. So then there is what is called a gating, especially certain information are gated. So these information, like a pain, if the pain is there, if you are stimulating a neuron, or what is that, acupuncture, there will be the pain is reduced, or decreased, or lost. So this is a gating. So these are the processing happening in the spinal cord, that is all happening at the sensory level, or in the posterior horn or the dorsal horn. Then what are the motor functions? So if you are looking at the motor functions, I have divided into three components. One, the purely motor, then involving the reflexes, the segmental reflexes, then thirdly involving the postural reflexes. Let me come back to the purely motor. The motor neurons, I mentioned, we have the medial and lateral nucleus. The lateral nucleus contains the alpha motor neuron, medial nucleus contains the gamma motor neurons. The alpha motor neurons supply the extrafusal fibers of the muscle. Extrafusal fibers are nothing but the fibers which contract, which produce the muscle contraction. The gamma motor neurons are the neurons which supply the intrafusal fibers of the muscle. These are intrafusal fibers are governing. They are governing the sensation. So that's the sensory input. That means they detect the stretch. So these are physiomotor fibers or intrafusal fibers, the gamma motor neurons. Then the spinal cord links both alpha and gamma motor neuron. So now what happens when gamma motor neuron is stimulated? It will activate the muscle spindle or the intrafusal fiber, the muscle spindle. That muscle spindle increases the activity in the root, posterior root, and this increased activity will make a synaptic contact with alpha motor neuron. So like that, alpha and gamma are linked. So rather I would say that gamma and alpha linkage. Alpha is not the first one. It starts with gamma, then ends on alpha motor neuron. So then there will be a control on the segmental and suprasegmental control, because the same muscle is not coming from a single segment, other segments, because it has to involve some of the fibers to be inhibited, some of the fibers to be facilitated, and for that reason the motor, this is the motor function. So I means control alpha and gamma motor neurons. Control means what? They send information. The second, the linking gamma and alpha, then trying to modulate or regulate segmental and suprasegmental activity of the motor neurons. Then they become a center, because a spinal center for these segmental reflexes, especially the myotatic stretch reflex. When you have stretched the by a knee jerk, the knee hammer, so then that will excite the intrafusal fibers. The intrafusal fibers in turn send sensory inputs to the uh, through the posterior root to the alpha motor neuron and produce the contraction. This is known as a stretch reflex, and this is also known as a myotatic stretch reflex, or it is known as a knee jerk, or it is known as a deep tendon reflexes. This is about a myotatic stretch reflex. So then another reflex is the polysynaptic reflex, especially the withdrawal reflex. When you touch a hot plate, you withdraw it. So this withdrawal, it is originating from the nociceptive, the painful inputs, and these painful inputs trying to protect you or withdraw you. These are called flexor reflexes. These are called extensor reflexes. These are called flexor reflexes. So that means withdrawal reflexes. So then there are, if there is a too much of a stretching, there is a, what is called a inverse stretch reflex. There is another circuit operates upon this thing. I will talk about this thing when I talk about the segmental reflexes. Then we have a crossed extensor reflex. So that means when you have one reflex is activated here, the opposite side, the extensor group of muscles are activated. Though that is a crossed extensor reflex. These are some segmental reflexes it performs, that is very important for the integrity of the various spinal motor activity. Then we have postural reflexes. Postural reflexes, if you take for example, if you happen to go to visit a baby or a newborn infant, of course nowadays it is very difficult that you try to move, or you are in the house and you have a baby in the house and you try to give the baby your fingers in the hand, it will try to grasp. That's a grasp reflex. So that is automatic. Automatically it holds on to this thing. So that's a grasp reflex. So that is a basic reflex which exists even at the time of birth or immediately after birth. So then there is what is called a positive support reaction, because whenever the foot or the limbs are placed, there will be a sort of a, the inputs from the skin on these areas, they will send the impulses so that the extensor get activated. That's the extensor support. So that means they will make the limbs as a rigid structures or a pillar like structures. That is a positive support reaction. So this is a postural reflexes where the center is in the spinal cord. So here the inputs coming from the whatever the cutaneous inputs or the sensory inputs, and then they will make the active. And sometimes what happens, this the other part, other extensor muscles, if there is too much of this thing, then this gives away. That is a negative support reaction. So that means there is a positive reaction and a negative. This is called a magnet reaction. That means rigid. Then comes this in the spinal cord is the center for a primary pattern generator for locomotion. So the locomotion, if you are trying to see any animal, even including human being, you try to move your limbs. So the limbs, that means the one limb goes forward and then the second limb goes forward. So that means in a sequential manner, the forward, sequential forward motion of the limbs. That's very beautiful, beautiful thing. That organization is there in the spinal cord. And not only that organization, if you are looking at the say for example Homo sapiens, we do not, we have the lower limbs only for the motion. If you are looking at the quadrupeds, the four-legged animals, you have to have, if they have to move, they have to move the forelimb also. The forelimb and hind limb should be joined. So now, in case of Homo sapiens, what we have that our previous animals have done is in comparison to the forelimb, what our forelimb does is the swinging of the arms. So you can just see that one leg is moving, the opposite is moving in that direction. like that. So this is exactly what happens if you are looking at you are a four-legged animal, and you can just see that particular consequence. So this is a pattern generator. That means a group of neurons which are activated. They are activated in sets, or in they are sensed in sets, so that they are activated. There would be a forward movement, especially the forward motion of one limb, and the maybe we think about a dog or a cat. So then you will know exactly how the upper and the forelimb and hind limbs, they work in as a unit for the motion. So this is a pattern generator. Here in the spinal cord, it is present, and it is present in the lumbar and cervical areas, because the lumbar area governs the lower extremity, lower limb, or the hind limb, and cervical area governs the foot limb. So this is the postural reflexes I mentioned. So then comes the autonomic nervous system, because the sympathetic outflow is through the lateral horn cells present in the thoracolumbar region. That means it's coming from the thoracic and lumbar segments, the lateral horns, intermediate lateral nucleus, whatever I was. So that means that sympathetic nerve supplies from the top to the bottom, top to the toe, top to the toe. You can just think about that. Maybe pupillary reflexes, they, whatever the sympathetic supply, there is a dilatation of the pupil because of the adrenergic activity. So that means starting from the pupillary reflexes, the circadian activity, or the cannon's responses, the fight and flight response, which is activating the adrenal medulla, or control of the heart and blood vessels. This is a sympathetic coming, and control of thoracolumbar visceral activity. So I'm talking about all viscera present in the thoracic and abdominal compartments. So they are, these viscera, maybe glands, increase whatever they want to do, then the smooth muscles, so they are this thing. And then in case of the vas difference, they will produce the contraction of the spinal vesicle muscle, and the vas difference that sets in the ejaculation reflex in males, in this, that's the sympathetic activity. So that means if sympathetic is paralyzed, so if you are looking at connect with the sympathetic and ejaculation reflex. If you block the sympathetic, there may be a problem in the ejaculation. He may have the erection. Erection is another response here, which is a parasympathetic activity. So that means this ejaculation is the contraction of the spinal vesicle and the vas difference. So that is responsible by the, or mediated by the sympathetic nervous system. And the sweating response. Sweating response is a sympathetic cholinergic fibers which are supplied to all sweat glands throughout our body. And there, of course, there is some differences in the sweat glands. I'm not going into detail. The parasympathetic activity, because vagus and other cranial nerves, they govern the other parasympathetic. Unlike sympathetic is only the spinal output, it is the thoracolumbar output. Parasympathetic activity, it is restricted to the sacral area. These are known as a sacral parasympathetic. They govern all the pelvic viscera. All the pelvic viscera, that is a colon, kidney, ureter, bladder, and urethra. Okay, so thus they control the bladder bowel movement, and sacral parasympathetic, that is through the pectoral parasympathetic. They control the penile erection, and this penile erection, because of the increased blood supply to the penis, corpora cavernosa, and that would make the erection. So that is the parasympathetic activity. Suffice to say that the spinal cord is the center for the entire sympathetic activity. So because sympathetic activity is required for the heart, blood vessels, and even the blood vessels reaching to the brain or to the toe, wherever, and adrenal activity and the pupillary reflexes, you can just see that. And if you are looking at the parasympathetic, it is only the pelvic viscera that is controlled by the parasympathetic nerve. Now, summarizing the important connections here, I'm just trying to make. We have the cervical segment, thoracic segment, lumbar segment, and sacral segments. And these are the nerves coming up here. So now, if you are looking at here broadly, this is C1 to C3. It's supplying the neck muscles. The C4 is diaphragm, important respiratory muscle, and the C5 is your deltoid, the shoulder muscle, and the C6 is a wrist muscle, C7 is a triceps, C7 and C8 are the fingers or the hand. Then comes the T1 hand, then T2 to T12 are the intercostal muscles, that's the trunk, then T7 to L1 is abdominal, and T11 to L2 is a sympathetic coming out that's responsible for the ejaculation reflex. Then L2 governs the hips, the quadriceps muscle L3, L4 and L5, hamstring muscles at the knee, and L4 and S1 foot. You go back to the diagram of that. If you are going back here, this beautiful diagram, you can just see all this whatever I was trying to depict. Okay, so now come back to this here. So now then S2 is a penile erection. S2 and S3 are the bowel, that means the defecation reflex, and then a bladder is a micturition reflex or the bladder control. This is not only reflex, emptying, even holding. So these are all governed by these reflexes. These are the important connections I'm trying to summarize here what I talked. So then to summary, it is a link between the body. Spinal cord is a link between the body and brain. It is present in the bony canal, that is a vertebral canal, covered by a pia, arachnoid, and dura, and filled with a fluid and adipose tissue or the fatty tissue, so that it is protected. It contains outer white matter and inner gray matter. If you go back to the central nervous system, where in the brain the inner white matter and outer gray matter, it's just reversed in the central compartment. So here its outer side is the white matter, the bundle of nerve fibers, and here is the neurons. And it is divided into three horns: dorsal horn, lateral horn, and ventral horn. Dorsal is sensory, and ventral is motor, lateral is sympathetic, especially thorax and lumbar segments. This transfers the functions. If we are looking at it, transfers signals. It processes signals: sorting, focusing, gauging, facilitation, and suppression. It performs the sensory and motor functions. It is the center for basic and tonic, or the segmental and the postural reflexes. And it is a primary pattern generator. It has a primary pattern generator for locomotion. The secondary pattern generator is present in the midbrain, because a person with a spinal cord only cannot walk, but the spinal cord has the centers which have an alternating situation setting. Then it controls the autonomic activity, sympathetic to all parts of the body, parasympathetic to pelvic organs. So this is the summary of what I focused today, and these are the textbook guidance, textbook, the candles, the Genong, and you can go back to this thing. This is a beautiful online that is from the University of Texas. You can just go to that. The chapters are available freely there online. You can just study. Some part of it is it's coming from there. Now, next class I will discuss about the spinal shock, because this is an important topic. Now I have mentioned about the spinal organization, Now I will talk about the spinal shock. Now, these are the some assignments I am trying to give it to you as a part of the questions, because you will be wondering what type of questions may come in on this topic. So now I would request all of you make an attempt to draw a labeled diagram showing both ascending and descending tracts. Please practice. Please practice. And then draw a label diagram showing a white matter and a gray matter of the spinal cord. Enumerate the functions of spinal cord. So that means all those four functions: the sensory, motor, reflexes, and autonomic. Then write short notes on Bell-Mezendy law. This is coming, or Muller's observations. The postural reflexes of the spinal cord I mentioned. The autonomic functions of the spinal cord, that means thoracolumbar outflow. Sometimes they will give a short note on thoracolumbar outflow. Physiology of the spinal parasympathetic, that means the sacral parasympathetic. So that means the erection, the bowel, and the bladder control. Then draw a diagram showing the spinal laminae. You try to make the diagram, and or draw a diagram showing the nuclei of the spinal cord. These are some of the assignments I'm trying to give it to you for today, and you work on it, and you do with the leisure.